My name is Princess Rihanna bint Khalid Al-Rashad. I am 25 years old. And on February 19, 2019, my family tied me to an iron post, doused me in fuel, and set me ablaze. My crime? I opened the Bible. But the flames that were meant to erase me became the moment Jesus Christ stepped into the fire and stood beside me. I was born into a gilded cage that most people would mistake for paradise. The Al-Rashad compound in northern Saudi Arabia wasn't just a royal residence, it was a surveillance state wrapped in marble and gold. As the youngest daughter of a family that controlled regional intelligence operations, I grew up understanding that walls have ears, servants have eyes, and even silence can be reported as suspicious. My father wasn't simply wealthy or powerful. He was the man who decided which information reached the royal court and which dissidents disappeared into the desert. He managed networks of informants across 3 countries, negotiating with foreign intelligence agencies before lunch and ordering the arrest of subversives before dinner. His power was absolute, and his faith was the weapon he used to justify it. My mother was different, but no less dangerous. She held advanced degrees in Islamic theology and had spent 2 decades training the daughters of Saudi elite in proper religious devotion. She could recite hadith justifying female subjugation without hesitation, and she believed that strictness was the purest form of love. To her, breaking a daughter's will was saving her soul. From the age of 5, my entire existence revolved around religious performance. Dawn prayers at 4:45 a.m. without exception. 3 hours of Quran memorization before breakfast. 2 hours of Islamic jurisprudence after lunch. By age 13, I had memorized over 3,000 verses and could recite the 99 names of Allah in perfect sequence. The religious instructors praised me as exemplary. My parents showcased me as proof of their righteousness. I knew it was simply the cost of survival. Every Thursday evening, I led Quran study sessions for the younger girls in our extended family. 20 to 30 daughters of cousins, uncles, and high-ranking officials would sit in perfect rows while I recited verses about obedience, modesty, and the agonizing punishments awaiting those who defied divine law. They gazed at me with such admiration, believing I possessed some special connection to the divine. But beneath my perfect recitations, I felt a hollow ache that no amount of prayer could fill, like screaming into a void that never answered back. The compound had 93 rooms, and by the time I turned 23, I had been inside all but one. The old servants' wing in the southern section had been sealed off after a renovation was abandoned years before my birth. It was forbidden territory, not because of any explicit rule, but because asking about it invited suspicion. And in my family, suspicion was its own form of guilt. It was during the winter of 2018, while the household was distracted with preparations for a diplomatic visit, that I found myself standing before the locked door of that abandoned wing. The key had been left carelessly on a guard's desk, and something in me, curiosity, defiance, or perhaps divine prompting, compelled me to take it. The rooms inside were thick with dust and neglect. Old furniture sat draped in cloth like ghosts. But in the third room, I discovered something that would shatter everything I thought I knew, a small wooden trunk tucked behind a collapsed wardrobe. Inside were personal effects that had belonged to a Filipino housekeeper who had worked for my grandparents decades earlier. Letters. A rosary. And wrapped in faded cloth, a pocket-sized New Testament in English. My hands trembled as I lifted it. Possessing a Bible in our household wasn't just forbidden, it was a death sentence. This was the book I had been taught to despise, the corrupted scripture of infidels, the tool of Western missionaries trying to destroy Islam. Yet here it was, hidden like treasure in my own family's forgotten spaces. I should have reported it immediately to the religious authorities. I should have burned it as evidence of contamination. Instead, I slipped it into the folds of my abaya and carried it back to my room like a criminal smuggling contraband. For nearly 2 weeks, that Bible remained hidden inside the lining of my pillowcase, untouched. Every night I felt its presence, dangerous, forbidden, pulling at me like a whisper I couldn't ignore. Fear paralyzed me. But on the 13th night, when the compound was silent and my door was locked, curiosity finally overpowered terror. I pulled out the small book and opened it by the dim light of my phone, expecting to find attacks on Islam, blasphemous lies, perhaps even satanic verses designed to lead believers astray. Instead, the first words my eyes landed on were these: "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I read that sentence 3 times, my heart pounding. This wasn't condemnation. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. For the first time in 25 years, I felt like someone was speaking to me, not demanding my submission, not threatening punishment, but simply inviting me to come. I kept reading. I discovered a man named Jesus who touched lepers that society had abandoned. Who forgave a woman caught in adultery when religious leaders wanted her stoned. Who washed his disciples' feet like a servant. Who taught that the greatest commandment was love, not fear. Every page contradicted what I had been told about Christianity. The imams had painted Christians as idolaters who worshiped 3 gods and corrupted their scriptures. But these words breathed with a mercy I had never encountered in all my years of Islamic study. Night after night, I returned to those forbidden pages. I read about Jesus calming storms, healing the sick, and showing compassion to those the religious elite despised. These stories awakened something in my soul that 5 daily prayers had never reached: a hunger for a God who loved rather than merely demanded, who pursued rather than punished, who died willingly rather than requiring endless sacrifice from his followers. Questions I had never dared to ask began flooding my mind. Why did Jesus seem so different from the God I had been taught to fear? Why did his words bring peace while Islamic texts often left me anxious? Why did I feel more alive reading this corrupted book than I ever felt reciting perfect verses? I began whispering prayers to Jesus instead of Allah, testing whether this God of the Bible was real or just beautiful fiction. And something inexplicable happened. Instead of feeling guilty or terrified, I felt an overwhelming peace settle over me, like someone had finally turned on a light in a room where I had been stumbling blind my entire life. But have you ever discovered something so beautiful that you knew it would destroy you if anyone found out? That's the edge I was living on. Every word I read was like drinking water after dying of thirst, but I knew that water was poison to everything my family valued: honor, tradition, and the religion that held our world together. And secrets this dangerous never stay hidden for long. The person who would betray me was already watching. And the fire was already being prepared. But to understand how a Saudi princess ended up tied to a stake, you need to understand the world I was born into, a world where gold covered everything except the truth, where power was absolute but peace was impossible, and where the greatest sin wasn't murder or cruelty, but daring to ask if there might be another way to reach God. Let me take you back to the beginning. 7 years before the fire, when I was 18 and still believed my emptiness was normal, a Kenyan woman named Miriam joined our household staff. She wasn't like the other servants. Most kept their eyes down, spoke only when spoken to, and moved through the compound like shadows, afraid that even existing too loudly might offend someone. But Miriam was different. Not rebellious or disrespectful. Just present. She looked you in the eye when you spoke. She smiled, not the nervous, placating smile of someone afraid of punishment, but a genuine warmth that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. My mother had hired her specifically to help with the younger children in our extended family. Miriam was efficient without being rushed, gentle without being weak, and she possessed something I couldn't name at the time but recognized instinctively: peace. Real peace. Not the forced tranquility that came from rigid obedience, but something authentic that seemed to follow her like a fragrance. Over the years, I found myself drawn to her in ways I didn't understand. Sometimes I would invent reasons to pass by wherever she was working, just to observe her. She hummed quietly while folding laundry, never loud enough to disturb anyone, but enough that I could hear contentment in the melody. She spoke to the children with a patience that seemed endless, even when they were difficult. And in moments when she thought no one was watching, I would catch her lips moving in what looked like silent conversation, her eyes soft with something that resembled love. It made no sense. She was a foreign worker, far from home, living in a country that treated people like her as disposable labor. She had every reason to be bitter, resentful, or at least resigned. Instead, she carried a joy that I, with all my privilege, education, and royal lineage, had never experienced. The night everything changed was in late 2012, during one of Riyadh's rare power outages. The compound descended into chaos. Generators kicked on in the main wings, but the servants' quarters remained in darkness. My father was away on intelligence business, and my mother was hosting an emergency meeting with the Women's Religious Committee in the East Parlor, their voices rising in irritation about the disruption. I found myself wandering the darkened corridors, restless and unable to sleep. The blackout had created a strange pocket of freedom. For once, no one was monitoring where I was or what I was doing. Everyone was too distracted. As I passed the servants' wing, I saw something that stopped me cold, a thin line of golden light beneath Miriam's door. Candles were forbidden in the compound, a fire hazard my father had banned years earlier. But there was unmistakably light coming from her room. My first instinct was to report it. That's what a good daughter would do. But curiosity overpowered duty. I moved closer and pressed my ear against the door. Silence. Then, very faintly, I heard her voice, not speaking, but whispering words in a rhythm that sounded like prayer, but wasn't any prayer I recognized. My hand moved to the door handle before my brain could stop it. I pushed it open with just a crack. The sight before me would haunt me for years. Miriam was kneeling on the floor, her back to me, with a small book cupped in her hands like she was holding something infinitely precious. The candlelight cast her shadow large against the wall, and her head was bowed low, not in the prostration of Islamic prayer, but in an intimate posture that looked more like a child speaking to a beloved father. The door creaked. She gasped and spun around, her eyes wide with terror. The book snapped shut in her hands. I froze in the doorway, my heart hammering. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, her afraid I would report her, me afraid of what I had just witnessed. Then she did something unexpected. Her face softened. The fear didn't completely leave her eyes, but it was joined by something else, compassion. She looked at me, really looked at me, and in a whisper barely audible above the sound of distant generators, she said the words that would shatter my world. "Princess, this is not against you. This is the one who loves you." She closed the book quickly and tucked it beneath her thin mattress, her hands shaking. I should have demanded to see it. I should have asked what she meant. I should have done something. Instead, I backed out of the room without a word and returned to my quarters, my mind spinning. A book she feared more than death. A book she protected even when caught. A book she called love. What could possibly be in those pages? In the weeks that followed, I watched Miriam with new eyes. I noticed things I had missed before, the way her lips moved in silent prayer while she worked, the way her face lit up when she thought no one was looking, the way she treated even the cruelest members of our household with an inexplicable kindness. She had something I didn't have. Something I desperately wanted but didn't know how to name. And somewhere in the servants' wing, hidden beneath a mattress, was a book that held the answer. I just didn't know yet that finding that answer would cost me everything. 3 months after that night, Miriam disappeared. I woke one morning to shouting in the servants' wing, sharp, authoritative voices that meant trouble. By the time I reached the corridor, 2 security guards were already escorting her toward the compound's exit, each gripping one of her arms. She carried nothing but a small cloth bag. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wet. No explanation was given. No one asked questions. In our household, people vanished all the time, servants who violated some invisible rule, staff members whose loyalty came into question, workers who simply knew too much. My father's reach was long, and his patience for anything that threatened his control was non-existent. I stood frozen in the hallway, watching the woman who prayed differently being marched toward exile, or worse. Our eyes met for just a second. In that glance, I saw fear. But I also saw something else, urgency. The guards pushed her forward, and I thought that would be the last time I ever saw her. But then, as they passed the junction where the main corridor met the servants' passage, Miriam stumbled. It looked accidental, a catch in her step that made her lurch forward. One of the guards cursed and steadied her roughly. In that split second of distraction, her hand shot out and pressed something into mine. A torn brown envelope. Thin. Light. Warm from being hidden against her body. "Princess," she whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. "He sees you." Then she was gone, dragged around the corner and out of my life forever. I never learned why she was deported. I never discovered if she made it home safely or disappeared into one of the detention centers where foreign workers sometimes vanish without trial. All I had left of her was the envelope burning in my hand like a live coal. I shoved it inside my abaya and walked, slowly, carefully, as if carrying a bomb, back to my room. My heart slammed against my ribs so violently I was certain everyone could hear it. Servants passed me in the hallway. My aunt crossed my path and asked if I was feeling well. I smiled and lied and kept walking, feeling the envelope press against my skin like an accusation. Once inside my room with the door locked, I pulled it out and stared at it. The envelope was cheap, wrinkled, stained with age. Whatever was inside felt small and rectangular, the shape of a book. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The same book I had seen cupped in Miriam's hands. The book she had prayed over. The book she had risked everything to keep. And now it was mine. My hands shook as the full weight of what I was holding settled over me. This wasn't just illegal. Possessing a Bible in Saudi Arabia wasn't a minor offense you could talk your way out of or pay a fine to resolve. It was apostasy. Corruption. Evidence of Western infiltration. In my father's hands, it would be proof of treason. And in a royal household. For a princess who led Quran studies and represented our family's religious devotion? This was a death sentence wrapped in paper and cloth. I should burn it. The thought came immediately, urgently. I could take it to the courtyard incinerator right now, destroy the evidence, and pretend this never happened. No one would ever know. But even as I thought it, I knew I wouldn't. Because if this book was dangerous enough to die for, it had to contain something powerful enough to live for. I hid the envelope in the lining of my pillowcase that night, using a small tear in the seam to slip it inside. Every time my head touched the pillow, I felt it there, a presence, a weight, a ticking clock counting down to discovery. For 3 months, I didn't open it. 3 months of sleepless nights, lying rigid in bed, imagining I heard footsteps outside my door. 3 months of jumping at every knock, every summons, every unexpected visit from my mother or aunt. 3 months of the envelope seeming to pulse with danger beneath my head, as if it were alive and trying to speak. I told myself I was being careful. Strategic. Waiting for the right moment. But the truth was simpler, I was terrified. Not just of being caught, but of what I might find inside. Because if Miriam was right, if that book really did contain something worth dying for, then reading it would change me. And change in my world was the most dangerous thing of all. But curiosity is a patient predator. It waits. It circles. And eventually, it strikes. On a cold night in early 2013, when the compound was quiet and my door was locked and I could no longer bear the weight of not knowing, I pulled the envelope from its hiding place. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded cloth, was a pocket-sized New Testament. Black leather. Gold-edged pages. English text. Small enough to conceal, old enough to have survived decades in hiding. I lifted it like it might explode. The leather was soft, worn smooth by someone else's hands, maybe Miriam's, or maybe someone before her who had also risked everything to keep these words alive. This was it. The forbidden book. The corrupted scripture. The tool of infidels. The most dangerous object I had ever held. I opened it to a random page, my heart in my throat, and made myself a promise, I would read just 1 page. Just enough to satisfy my curiosity. Then I would destroy it and forget this ever happened. 1 page couldn't hurt. 1 page couldn't change anything. I had no idea how wrong I was. The first words my eyes landed on were in Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. Come to me. Not submit or face punishment. Not obey these laws or burn forever. Not prove your devotion through endless ritual. Just come. And not to the righteous, not to the pure, not to those who had earned it. To the weary. The burden. The exhausted ones carried weights too heavy to bear. For the first time in 25 years, I felt like someone was speaking to me instead of at me. Not demanding. Not threatening. Not measuring my worthiness. Inviting. Something cracked open inside my chest, something I didn't even know had been sealed shut. My eyes blurred with tears I couldn't explain. I had spent my entire life trying to earn approval from a God who seemed perpetually disappointed, and here was someone simply asking me to come as I was. That night, I read for 3 hours. It became a ritual. Every night after the compound fell silent, I would lock my door, stuff cloth beneath the frame to muffle any sound, and pull out the New Testament with trembling hands. I read by the dim light of my phone, one finger hovering over the screen to darken it instantly if I heard footsteps. The stories I discovered shattered everything I thought I knew about God. I read about Jesus touching a leper, a man considered so unclean that even his shadow was avoided, and instead of recoiling in disgust, Jesus reached out his hand and healed him. In my world, the unclean were kept at a distance, their contamination feared and despised. But this Jesus moved toward them, welcomed them, touched them when no one else would. I read about him teaching his followers to love their enemies and pray for those who persecuted them. Love enemies? In the religion I knew, enemies were to be conquered, punished, destroyed. Mercy was weakness. Vengeance was justice. But Jesus spoke of a love so radical it extended even to those who wished you harm. Then I reached the crucifixion. I read how they beat him, mocked him, nailed him to a cross. How he hung there dying while people spat at him and cursed him. And in that moment, when he had every right to call down judgment, to summon armies of angels, to destroy those who tortured him, he whispered, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I had to set the book down. My hands were shaking too violently to hold it. This was grace at its peak. Love demonstrated not through words but through blood. He didn't die fighting. He died forgiving. And he did it willingly, not as a helpless victim, but as a deliberate sacrifice. Nothing in my 25 years of Islamic teaching had prepared me for this. Night after night, I returned to those pages like someone starving, finally finding food. And with each chapter, something grew inside me, a warmth, a peace, something deeper than any ritual had ever produced. It wasn't the temporary calm that came from perfectly executed prayers. It was something fundamental, like a locked door inside my soul had finally been opened and light was flooding in. But the peace brought confusion. How could this be the corrupted book I'd been warned about? Where were the blasphemies, the contradictions, the attacks on Islam? Instead, I found wisdom, compassion, and a love so profound it made everything else feel like a pale imitation. Dangerous questions began forming in the dark corners of my mind, questions I had never dared to ask. What if everything I'd been told was backwards? What if the truth wasn't what I'd been taught to defend, but what I'd been taught to destroy? What if the real corruption wasn't in this book, but in the system that forbade me from reading it? The changes started small, but they were impossible to hide completely. I began looking at our servants differently, not as inferior beings who existed to serve us, but as people with dignity, with stories, with souls as valuable as my own. When our driver made a mistake and my father screamed at him, I felt something rise in my chest, anger at the injustice, compassion for the man trembling under the verbal assault. During Quran study sessions, I started noticing things I had glossed over before, the emphasis on punishment, the celebration of conquest, the clear hierarchy that placed some lives above others. Verses I had recited 1,000 times suddenly sounded harsh, cold, lacking the warmth I was discovering in the gospel. I caught myself defending a servant girl who had broken a dish, speaking up when my aunt wanted her beaten. My mother gave me a strange look. My aunt's eyes narrowed with suspicion. I was changing, and change was dangerous. One night, after reading about Jesus calming a storm with just his words, I closed the book and sat in the darkness of my room. My heart was pounding, not with fear this time, but with desperate hope. I whispered into the silence, feeling foolish and terrified and utterly sincere. Jesus, if you're real, show me. I need to know if this is true. I need to know if you're really who these pages say you are. Because if you are. I couldn't finish the sentence. If he was real, everything would have to change. My family. My future. My entire identity. But I was already too far gone to turn back. The seed had been planted. And seeds, once rooted, cannot be unplanted. They only grow. It was my aunt who noticed first. Aunt Fatima had always been the family's unofficial spiritual enforcer, a woman who could quote hadith like weapons and wielded religious law like a sword. She led our women's study sessions with an iron grip, and nothing escaped her attention. One afternoon during Quran instruction, she paused mid-sentence and stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Rihanna," she said slowly, "you seem distracted." I wasn't distracted. I was just no longer performing with the same mechanical precision I once had. My responses came slower now, softer, as if some part of me was holding back from fully committing to words I no longer believe. "Forgive me, Aunt," I said, lowering my eyes. "I'm simply tired." Her gaze lingered on me for a long moment before she continued the lesson. But I felt the shift. The scrutiny had begun. The changes were small, but in a household built on rigid conformity, small changes were earthquakes. I stopped mocking Christians during our religious instruction sessions. Before, I had joined enthusiastically when the teachers ridiculed Christian beliefs, calling them polytheists, corrupted, misguided. Now, I sat silent, my stomach turning at the casual cruelty. I began asking questions that made the instructors uncomfortable. Why would God need us to fear him if he truly loves us? I asked once. The room fell silent. My aunt's eyes narrowed. "Fear is the beginning of wisdom," she snapped. But her answer felt hollow, and we both knew it. Most dangerously, I started treating servants like human beings. I thanked our housekeeper by name when she cleaned my room. I asked our cook about her family. When a young servant girl spilled tea on my mother's guest, and my mother raised her hand to strike her, I stepped between them. "It was an accident," I said quietly. My mother stared at me like I had spoken in tongues. Princesses didn't defend servants. We didn't acknowledge their humanity. We certainly didn't shield them from deserved punishment. "You're being soft," my mother said coldly. "Softness is weakness." But it wasn't softness I was feeling. It was something I'd read in the gospel, something about treating others as you would want to be treated, about the last being first, about a God who came not to be served but to serve. I was changing. And everyone could see it. My aunt's surveillance intensified immediately. She began appearing in unexpected places, outside my room, in corridors I walked through, during times I usually had to myself. Her questions became sharper, more probing. "You seem different, niece. Are you troubled about something? Have you been spending time with anyone new? Your devotion seems distracted. Is your faith wavering?" Each question was a trap, and I felt the net tightening around me. Then I started noticing the intrusions. Items in my room would be slightly out of place, a drawer not quite closed the way I'd left it, books on my shelf rearranged, my closet disturbed. Someone was searching my belongings. Someone was looking for evidence of whatever had changed in me. Panic set in. I moved the Bible 3 times in 1 month, first from my pillowcase to a hollowed-out section of an old textbook, then to a gap behind my dresser, finally to a loose tile in my bathroom floor. Each hiding place felt inadequate. Each night I lay awake, certain I heard footsteps outside my door, imagining the moment they would burst in and find it. The compound's atmosphere changed. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. My cousins exchanged glances I wasn't meant to see. Even servants who had warmed to my kindness now looked at me with something like pity, as if they knew something terrible was coming and couldn't warn me. Only my cousin Leon seemed unchanged. Leon and I had been close since childhood, more like sisters than cousins. We'd shared secrets, dreams, complaints about our strict upbringing. She was one of the few people in the compound I thought I could trust. She started spending more time with me, asking gentle questions about how I was feeling, whether anything was bothering me. I mistook her attention for concern. I thought she was worried about me. I didn't realize she was gathering information. The tension became unbearable. Every morning I woke up wondering if this would be the day they found the Bible. Every night I went to sleep surprised I'd survive another 24 hours without discovery. My prayer life deepened even as the danger increased. I would whisper to Jesus in the darkness, no longer asking if he was real, but begging him for strength to face whatever was coming. I know they're closing in, I prayed one night, my face pressed into my pillow. I know this can't last much longer. But I don't regret finding you. Even if it costs me everything. On the evening of February 18, 2019, I made a decision. I retrieved the Bible from its hiding place beneath the bathroom tile, sat on my bed, and opened it with trembling hands. I knew the risk. I knew someone might walk in. I knew I was being watched more closely than ever. But I couldn't stop. I had tasted something real, something true, and I would rather die holding it than live without it. If they find me, I whispered, running my fingers over the fragile pages, let them find me with your words in my heart. I began to read. I didn't know that Leanne was already on her way to my room. I didn't know the trap had already been set. I didn't know I had less than 5 minutes of freedom left. February 19, 2019. Evening prayers had just ended, and the compound had settled into its familiar quiet rhythm. I sat cross-legged on my bed, the New Testament open in my lap, my lips moving silently over words from the Gospel of John. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Light. That's what it felt like someone had finally turned on a light in a room where I'd been stumbling blind for 25 years. I was so absorbed in the words that I didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Didn't hear my door handle turn. Didn't realize someone had entered until it was too late. Rihanna, I wanted to ask if you... Leanne's voice cut off mid-sentence. I looked up and our eyes met across the room. Time seemed to slow, stretched thin like glass about to shatter. I saw the exact moment she registered what I was holding. Saw her eyes widen. Saw her face transform from casual friendliness to pure horror. The Bible was still open in my hands, undeniable, damning. For one frozen heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then Leanne screamed. It wasn't a shriek of fear, it was a wail of anguish and rage, the sound of someone who had just witnessed a desecration. The sound pierced through the compound like a blade, shattering the evening silence. Guards. Guards. She has a Bible. She's been corrupted. My body finally responded. I tried to shove the book under my pillow, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it. It fell to the floor, pages splayed open, impossible to hide. Alarms began to sound, sharp, electronic wails that meant security breach, that meant danger, that meant someone in the household had committed an unthinkable act. Within seconds, I heard boots thundering through the corridors. Doors slamming open. Voices shouting orders. I stood frozen in the center of my room, the Bible at my feet like evidence at a crime scene, and realized with crystalline clarity, this was it. The moment I had been dreading and somehow expecting since the night I first opened those pages. My door burst open. 4 guards poured in, their faces hard with purpose. They saw the book immediately. One of them picked it up like it was contaminated, holding it away from his body. Secure her, the lead guard barked. Hands grabbed my arms, rough and efficient. Cold metal closed around my wrists, chains, heavy and unyielding. I didn't resist. What would be the point? Within 5 minutes, I was surrounded. Within 10, I was chained and being dragged from my room. My father arrived like a storm, his face twisted with an emotion I'd never seen before. Not just rage, though there was plenty of that. Something else. Fear. As if my possession of that book had threatened not just our family's honor, but something deeper. His power. His control. His entire worldview. What have you done? His voice was barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. What have you brought into this house? I met his eyes and said nothing. What could I say that he would understand? My mother appeared behind him, her face streaked with tears. But she wouldn't look at me, turned her head away as if the sight of her youngest daughter had become unbearable. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but she didn't speak a word in my defense. Within minutes, the entire family had gathered. My uncles arrived, their faces dark with fury. My aunts clutched their prayer beads like weapons. Even servants were pulled from their quarters to witness what was happening. She's brought a foreign god into this house, one uncle shouted. She's betrayed everything we stand for. This is apostasy, another declared. The punishment is clear. We must act immediately, my father said, his voice cold and final. Before word spreads. Before this contamination touches anyone else. They argued over the method, some wanted a quiet disappearance, others insisted on something more visible. Something that would serve as a warning. My Aunt Fatima's voice cut through the chaos, burn her. Publicly. Let everyone see what happens to those who abandon the faith. The room fell silent. Burning. The ancient punishment for heresy, for witchcraft, for crimes so severe that the body itself must be purified by fire. My father nodded slowly. It will be done. Tonight. Now. No trial. No opportunity to defend myself. No appeal to mercy or reason. In their world, honor demanded immediate action. Hesitation would be seen as weakness. They dragged me through the corridors I had walked my entire life, past rooms where I had memorized Quran verses, past the prayer room where I had led study sessions, past the kitchen where I had thanked servants by name. The household staff was forced to line the path, their faces masks of shock and pity. Some looked away. Others stared with something like recognition, as if they had always known I was different, had always suspected I would meet a tragic end. I should have been terrified. I should have been screaming, begging, fighting for my life. Instead, I felt an eerie calm settle over me, a peace that made no logical sense. I had read about martyrs in those forbidden pages. Read about Stephen being stoned while he prayed for his killers. Read about disciples who rejoiced at being counted worthy to suffer for his name. I had found something worth dying for. They brought me to the central courtyard and tied me to an iron post that had once been used for hanging laundry. The irony wasn't lost on me, a mundane object transformed into an execution stake. Someone poured fuel over my clothes. The smell was overwhelming, chemical and sharp. It soaked through my abaya, cold against my skin, and I understood this was really happening. They were really going to do this. I looked at my family gathered in a semicircle around me. My father's face was stone. My mother still wouldn't meet my eyes. My uncles watched with grim satisfaction. My aunts clutched each other, weeping. And Leon, my cousin, my childhood friend, the one I had trusted, stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale but resolute. She had done what she believed was right. She had protected the family's honor. She had sentenced me to death. A guard stepped forward with a torch, its flame dancing in the evening breeze. My heartbeat slowed. Time seemed to stretch. The rope cut into my wrists. Fuel dripped from my clothes onto the stones below. And I whispered the only prayer that mattered. Jesus, if you are real, I am yours. The torch moved closer. And I closed my eyes, ready to meet the one I had been reading about for all these months. The torch descended toward my fuel-soaked dress. Time didn't just slow, it fractured, each second stretching into an eternity. I could see individual sparks falling from the flame. Could hear my own heartbeat like thunder in my ears. Could smell the acrid mixture of kerosene and fear. I whispered one final prayer, Jesus, if you are real, I am yours. The flame touched the fabric. Fire exploded upward with a violent roar, a wall of orange and red that should have consumed me instantly. I braced myself for agony, for the searing pain of flesh burning, for the horror of dying slowly while my family watched. Instead, I felt wind. A blast of air so powerful it nearly knocked me backward against the post, violent, roaring, like a desert storm materializing out of nowhere. But the night had been perfectly still seconds before. There was no storm. No natural explanation. The flames erupted around me, climbing higher and higher, furious and hungry. But they didn't touch me. I opened my eyes and watched in stunned disbelief as the fire bent away from my body, pushed back by invisible hands. The flames rose in a perfect circle, a cylinder of blazing heat that surrounded me but never reached me. They twisted and writhed as if fighting against some unseen force, desperate to fulfill their purpose but unable to cross an invisible barrier. The courtyard erupted in gasps. "Impossible," someone whispered. "What is this?" another voice cried out. I stood in the center of an inferno that refused to consume me, and then I saw him. A figure materialized within the flames, not emerging from outside, but simply present, as if he had been there all along and my eyes were only now able to perceive him. A man. But not like any man I had ever seen. He was white, not pale skin white, but light white, radiant white, as if he were made of pure luminescence rather than flesh. The brightness should have been blinding, should have forced me to look away, but instead, I found I couldn't stop staring. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, beautiful in a way that transcended physical appearance, beautiful in a way that made everything else in the world seem like a faded copy. His eyes held me. Eyes like living water, clear, deep, infinite. Eyes that saw everything I had ever done, every doubt I had ever harbored, every sin I had ever committed, and yet looked at me with such overwhelming love that I felt my knees weaken. He stood within the fire as if it were nothing. As if flames were merely decorations that held no power over him. His presence was more real than the iron post at my back, more solid than the stones beneath my feet, more tangible than the physical fire that surrounded us. Everything else felt like a dream, and he was the only thing truly awake. He reached toward me, not to pull me out, but to stand with me. His hand extended, palm open, and I saw marks there. Scars that shouldn't exist on someone so perfect. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it filled the entire courtyard, resonated in my chest, echoed in my very bones. "Daughter, fear not." They meant death. "I bring life." The moment the words left his lips, everything changed. The flames died instantly, not gradually fading, but extinguished as if someone had flipped a switch. 1 second they were raging, the next, they were gone. Smoke dissipated into nothing. The oppressive heat vanished. The ropes binding my wrists snapped and fell away without anyone touching them, dropping to the ground like dead snakes. I looked down at my clothes. The abaya that had been drenched in fuel, that had caught fire, that should have been charred to ashes, was completely untouched. Not a scorch mark. Not a singe. Not even the smell of smoke clinging to the fabric. I raised my hands, turning them over in wonder. My skin was perfect. Unburned. Unmarked. The courtyard had fallen into a silence so complete it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. Then the reactions came, fast and chaotic. My father collapsed. His legs simply gave out, and he crumpled to the stones like a puppet with cut strings, his face drained of all color. My mother fainted, her body going limp so suddenly that my aunt barely caught her before she hit the ground. One of the guards screamed a raw, primal sound of terror and ran. Just turned and fled into the night as if demons were chasing him. Another guard dropped to his knees, his hands raised in a gesture of either surrender or worship, I couldn't tell which. My uncles stood frozen, their faces masks of shock and something that might have been awe or might have been horror. One of them was openly weeping. The servants who had been forced to watch huddled together, some pressing their hands over their mouths, others clutching each other for support. Leanne stood perfectly still, her face white as death, staring at me like I had become something she couldn't comprehend. No one spoke. No one moved. The entire compound seemed suspended in the impossible moment, trying to process what they had just witnessed, trying to reconcile what their religion told them should happen with what their eyes had seen. I stood at the center of it all, the ropes at my feet, tears streaming down my face, utterly unable to move. The man, Jesus, was no longer visible, but I could still feel his presence like warmth against my skin, like a hand resting on my shoulder, like a promise whispered directly into my soul. A miracle had just rewritten their theology in front of their eyes. And I knew, standing there in that terrified silence, that everything had changed. They had tried to kill me. God had other plans. I stood trembling in the center of the courtyard, tears streaming down my face, surrounded by my family's traumatized silence. No one dared approach me. No one dared speak. I had become something they couldn't categorize, neither dead nor alive, neither guilty nor innocent, neither natural nor supernatural. Then, from somewhere behind the courtyard, a door opened. Not violently. Not with dramatic force. Just opened. As if someone had simply decided it was time to enter. 3 strangers walked through, 2 men and 1 woman. They moved with a calmness that made no sense given the chaos they were stepping into. No hesitation. No fear. They walked as if they had every right to be there, as if they had been expected all along. The woman in front was middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a simple braid. She wore ordinary clothes, jeans, a modest jacket, nothing that suggested who she was or why she was here. But there was something in her expression, a certainty, a peace, that reminded me instantly of Sister Miriam. She looked directly at me and spoke in Arabic, her voice gentle but carrying absolute authority. We were sent. Come now. I didn't question it. Didn't ask who sent them or how they got past compound security or what was happening. My body simply moved, my legs carrying me forward even though my mind was still trying to process the miracle I had just experienced. The courtyard should have erupted. Guards should have intercepted them. My father should have ordered their arrest. My uncles should have blocked my path. Instead, everyone remained frozen, as if an invisible hand had pressed pause on the entire scene. My family and the guards stood like statues, their eyes tracking my movement but their bodies utterly incapable of intervening. Some strained against the invisible paralysis, their faces contorted with effort. But none could move. The courtyard parted before me like water. No one touched me. No one stopped me. No one could. The 3 strangers surrounded me protectively, and we walked through the compound gates as if leaving for an evening stroll. A covered truck waited just outside, engine already running, its presence impossible and yet undeniable, as if it had been parked there all along, waiting for exactly this moment. They helped me into the back. The moment the door closed behind us, I heard shouts erupting from the courtyard, the spell broken, chaos unleashed. But we were already moving, the truck accelerating into the darkness. Inside, the woman wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. One of the men handed me a bottle of water with a gentleness that made fresh tears spring to my eyes. Who are you? I managed to whisper. Believers, the woman said simply. Like you. We received word. God sent us. Word from whom? How did you know? We don't always know how, one of the men said, his voice accented, Egyptian, maybe. We only know that when God says go, we go. When He says rescue, we rescue. The truck drove through routes I didn't recognize, back roads, service paths, trails that seemed barely wide enough for the vehicle. These were smuggler routes, I realized. Paths used by dissidents and refugees, by those fleeing persecution or seeking freedom. We approached checkpoints that should have stopped us. Guard stations that should have demanded identification. Security barriers that should have been impenetrable. Each time, something impossible happened. A guard would wave us through without looking. A barrier would be already open. A checkpoint would be mysteriously unstaffed. As if God Himself was clearing the path ahead of us. How? I started to ask. Don't question it, the woman said gently. Just receive it. By dawn, we had crossed into Kuwait. I watched the sun rise over a border I never thought I'd cross, breathing air that belonged to a different country, feeling the first taste of freedom on my tongue. By nightfall, we were in Cyprus. The safe house was small but warm, a modest apartment in a neighborhood that asked no questions. When we entered, I was overwhelmed by the sight of people rising to greet us. Believers. A small community of men and women who gathered in secret to worship the God I had only just begun to know. Some were refugees like me. Others were expatriates who had chosen to help. Several were former Muslims who understood exactly what I had risked and lost. The moment I stepped through the door, my legs gave out. I collapsed into someone's arms, I never learned whose, and wept. Not the silent, controlled tears I had cried in the courtyard, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place I didn't know existed. I cried for everything I had lost. I cried for the family I would never see again. I cried for the terror of nearly being burned alive. But mostly, I cried from relief. They carried me to a small room with a bed and clean sheets. Women I didn't know helped me out of my fuel-stained clothes and into something soft and clean. They brought me food I couldn't eat and water I drank gratefully. Throughout the evening, people came to sit with me. They shared their stories in quiet voices, tales of miraculous escapes, of divine interventions, of families lost and faith found. Each testimony was a thread in a larger tapestry, and I realized I was now part of it. A young woman from Iran told me how Jesus appeared to her in a dream and told her to leave everything. An older man from Egypt described being smuggled out in a shipping container, praying the entire time, and arriving safely against all odds. He didn't just save you from the fire, one woman said, squeezing my hand. He saved you for something. There's a purpose in your survival. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply and without fear. And I dreamed. In the dream, I saw Sister Miriam standing in a garden filled with light. She was smiling, not the careful, guarded smile she wore in our compound, but a radiant, joyful expression of pure freedom. She looked at me and spoke the same words she had whispered years ago. This is the one who loves you. Then she added something new, and now you know it's true. I woke with tears on my face and peace in my heart. I was free. And my new life was just beginning. 6 months have passed since October 14, 2021. 6 months of living two lives, the one everyone sees, and the one only Jesus knows. By day, I'm still Princess Aliyah bint Fahd Al Saud. I attend royal functions. I represent the kingdom at diplomatic events. I maintain the image my family trained me to project. But the woman wearing that title isn't the same woman who boarded that plane to Atlanta. The cost has been significant. I carry a loneliness I never anticipated, sitting in rooms full of family while harboring a secret that would shatter them. Smiling through conversations about Islamic initiatives while my heart is secretly meditating on the Sermon on the Mount. Maintaining careful distance from the life I'm living inside, the faith I'm nurturing in hidden moments. I can't share what happened with my mother. Can't tell my father about the dreams where Jesus speaks to me. Can't explain to my cousins why I've grown quieter, more contemplative, less eager to debate and defend. The isolation is real. The fear is constant. One discovered Bible, one overheard prayer, one moment of carelessness could cost me everything I've ever known. But the gain defies description. I have peace I never knew existed. Not the performance of confidence I wore like armor, but actual peace, deep, unshakable, rooted in something beyond my circumstances or my identity or my achievements. A peace that remains even when I'm terrified of discovery. A peace that whispers, "You are loved," even when I feel utterly alone. I have purpose beyond royal duty. For the first time in my life, I'm not striving to prove myself worthy of my title or my lineage or my faith. I'm simply learning to receive love I didn't earn and can't lose. Looking back now at that moment in the plaza, I understand it differently. What felt like humiliation was actually mercy. What looked like public defeat was private rescue. God stopped me so publicly because that's what it took to break through my armor. A quiet whisper wouldn't have reached me. A gentle invitation wouldn't have penetrated the layers of pride and performance I'd built around my heart. He had to interrupt my life dramatically because I was so desperately lost while being so completely convinced I had found truth. The Bible I tried to stomp became the light leading me home. The book I viewed as corrupted became the words that liberated me. The message I attempted to silence became the voice I now listen for in every quiet moment. My identity has shifted in ways I'm still discovering. I'm no longer primarily shaped by royal expectations or family legacy or national pride. I'm being reborn in truth, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Becoming someone I never imagined I could be, a daughter. Not of a prince. Not of a kingdom. But of the King who loved me enough to stop me before I destroyed myself. The journey continues. I'm still navigating danger. Still hiding my faith. Still learning what it means to follow Jesus in circumstances that make following him almost impossible. Some days the fear overwhelms me. Some days I wonder if I'm strong enough to sustain this double life. Some days I'm tempted to rationalize my way back to the certainty I used to perform. But then I remember the paralysis. The presence. The overwhelming love that saw all of me and didn't turn away. And I know I can never go back to the woman I was. If you're reading this story, here's what I want you to understand: God will interrupt your life if that's what it takes to save it. He'll stop you mid-step if you're heading toward destruction. He'll shatter your certainty if your certainty is keeping you from truth. He'll expose your armor if that armor is suffocating your soul. It won't feel like mercy in the moment. It'll feel like humiliation. Like loss. Like everything you built crumbling beneath your feet. But on the other side of that breaking is a freedom you can't imagine from inside your prison. I sit now in my private quarters, well past midnight, with that hidden Bible open before me. The same book I tried to crush. The same words I called corrupted. They glow in the lamplight like treasure. My lips move in prayer, not the memorized rituals of my childhood, but honest conversation with someone who listens. Someone who knows my real name beneath all my titles. Someone who stopped me from making the biggest mistake of my life and then invited me into his presence despite everything I'd done against him. The path ahead is uncertain. The danger is real. The cost continues to climb. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I came to Atlanta to make a statement. Instead, God made me his daughter. And nothing, not royal expectations, not family pressure, not even the threat of losing everything, will ever make me regret the moment my legs froze and my heart finally, truly, opened. Before you go, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so YouTube keeps showing you stories like this. Share it with someone who needs hope. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I read every single comment. Thank you for listening to our story. May the King of Kings meet you in your darkest hour, just like he met us in ours. God bless you.